Well, good morning, everybody. Minister's given about 20 minutes and don't ever expect him not to or her not to take full advantage of that. There is a quotation or a comment that I saw some time ago in some writing that I like very much, and it really challenged me, and it goes like this: the only time that you're unhappy is when you don't get what you want. And it's in that little, I think it's up there, isn't it? Yeah. And I looked at that and I thought, the only time I'm unhappy is when I don't get what I want. Now, wait a minute. There's a lot of things about which I am not happy that have nothing to do with what I get or what I don't get. But I held back on being too reactive to that and thought a while and carried that around with me a while. And finally, I came to the conclusion that seems to be pretty true. Now, maybe you could argue that, but I have not found much of anything that makes me unhappy that doesn't have to do with something that I want. And that can be almost anything. It can be the want of a new friendship, the want of a new automobile, the want of a new job, and the want of a whatever, or the want that I feel, the need that I feel about having somebody else do something the way I want it done, or that it needs to be done because I know better than almost anybody else the way things have been done. So that's a corollary to this one, and that is, that when I'm unhappy is when people are not doing what I want them to do or behaving in the way that I think they ought to. And of course, I know that. I know that I'm right, is what I'm really saying. The interesting thing about that is that almost everybody gets caught up in that. And we'll do almost anything to try to get people to do what it is we think that they ought to do. We will manipulate, we will coerce, we will shift and do all kinds of subtle little things. But the darnest thing about it is that people keep changing. And so we work harder at it. And the way we work harder at it is we decide we're going to train them. And the problem with that is, without us realizing it, when we're trying to train them, everybody else is trying to train them, and they're trying to train you. And you can get so far with this, and after a while you realize this ain't working. And when it's not working, you get frustrated, and you get angry, and you get resentful, and then in your own self-pity, all these years that I've put into this relationship, or all that I've given to this particular job, and all that I have expended over here, and look where I am right now. And when you get to that point, then you can be really self-righteously miserable. And that, of course, leads to suffering heroically. And that can start the whole process over again. Now, it may seem like I'm overextending this a little bit or overemphasizing it, but I think we see this all the time. This kind of thing happen all the time with a lot of people. I have seen it happen with me. I still see it happen with me, and I know that comes as a great shock to you because I'm supposed to be your spiritual leader, see? But I get into my stuff just like anybody gets into his or her stuff. The truth of the matter is that there is relatively little control that you can have over the events of life. Now, that comes as a big surprise, especially those who have been in science of mind for 30 or 40 years, like is in my case. And we are told that you can control the circumstances. And I can point to a page, several pages, but one page in particular. Go to the Science of Mind textbook on page 266 in the chapter Principles of Successful Living. And near the bottom third of the page, Ernest Holmes tells us there is such a thing as control over circumstances. And I say, bah! I remember one time I was at a conference. It was a summer conference at Fountainhead, Oklahoma. This was a number of years ago. We had this summer conference like it was the C. Lamar Central United States. As a matter of fact, we had an organization called the United Ministers of Religious Science Central. And there was one very, very prominent minister that was there, wonderful minister, great guy. I loved him like a brother. He stood up, and it was at a time when the news had just come out that a satellite, the orbit of a satellite that we had in the sky was beginning to decay. And he got up and led us all in a spiritual mind treatment to boost it back into orbit. Now, you look at that and say, well, why not? Why not? You can treat for anything. It's just kind of stupid to violate the laws of nature. And a lot of us take a while to get to that point where we realize it. We cannot control circumstances. Now, what I'm talking about is not having control over your life, but to control what's going on outside of you. We can try, and we'll find that after a while it'll drive us crazy. You see, I think, and I'm talking here about the obsessive, compulsive need to control things according to the way you have decided they are supposed to be. Let's make a distinction there. Now, you control the automobile that you drive. That's a circumstance, of course. And we can get into a lot of nuances here. But I think you get what I'm talking about. You see, I believe that one of the main underpinnings of all dysfunction in our society is this obsessive-compulsive need to control things according to the way we think that they are. This is dysfunction. I read a really interesting article a while back that had a statistic in it that I thought was shocking, and that is 97%. How true this is, I don't know. It may be only 96.5%, those of you who want to pick. 97% of the population of the world is addicted. Wow! Can you believe it? I hardly drink at all. I have a little wine once in a while. I haven't smoked pot in 40 years. And, that sort of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. John Bradshaw, a great addictionologist, you don't hear a whole lot about anymore. I guess he's kind of pulled back. Is that an inappropriate admission on the part of a minister? Well, it happened. Anyway, John Bradshaw, an addictionologist, former Catholic priest who'd done so much in the area of dysfunction and addictionology, defined addiction as an obsessive-compulsive attachment to something, person, circumstance, thing, something without which you do not think you can survive. That's pretty extreme, isn't it? Now, I don't go that far. I rather think of addiction as an obsessive-compulsive attachment to something that may lead to a state of dysfunction in your personal life. And I think every one of us has experienced that kind of thing. And you see, all of this is rooted in one basic thing. And what that thing is that we have had a tendency to ignore, or just we have the inability. That's not having something. That's lacking something. We lack the ability of recognizing the one source. We tend to forget that we're all made in the image and likeness of that which made us, that there is one thing. That one thing expresses as everything. And that one thing, all there was in the beginning was that one thing. So each of us must be part of that one thing. This is a simple concept. Everybody can understand that. But few people embrace it because they can't believe it. That's why we have to keep reminding ourselves. That's why we keep coming to places like this, to talk to people like each other who can begin to see that, begin to embrace that idea a little bit. We cannot control the events of life, but we can control, and we have virtually unlimited control over how we are going to respond and interact and react to those events. When we change our experience of something, we can indeed change our world. You know, a number of years ago, a great many years ago, I took a thing called EST. Any of you remember EST? A few hands went up. The Erhard Training Seminars, Werner Erhard. It's now the Forum. Oh, it's not really the Forum. EST has been transformed into the Forum, which is much nicer. Very, very useful. Well, I found EST was fun because I had had so much metaphysics at that time. This is about 30 years ago. That everything that they were trying to do and all of the manipulations and you're not letting you go to the bathroom and all of that kind of stuff. It was nonsense, but I found it fun because I knew exactly what they were doing, or at least most of the time. But in there was a comment that made about the only thing that I can remember from that whole process, besides people screaming at each other, was the comment, experience your experience. What does that mean? Sounds like just play on words. But it's very meaningful. It was very meaningful for me. Think about it. How many people have an experience in life and they don't know what's going on? They're not really experiencing their experience. They're having a non-experience of their experience. And so this is what I'm talking about. Begin to wake up and experience what's going on. In other words, experience your experience. And you find that this will begin to change the way you experience life itself. And then something magical happens. We don't talk a lot about magic here. Wayne Dyer wrote a book, Real Magic, so maybe there is such a thing. But at any rate, it's mystical what happens. It's almost as if you project some kind of an energetic field that comes out of this scintillating mind of yours that allows for an influence that touches the minds and hearts of other people, and then the world does begin to change. It's incredible. But it's because of the change in you. Because nobody can change anything except what starts as an inner change within you. When you begin to move in that direction, when you begin to experience your experience, what happens is that you make yourself accessible to the creative activity of life, the creative activity of God in this manifest realm. In the Hindu tradition, they would talk about the activation of the Kundalini, not just in the body, when a lot of people relate to that, but the Kundalini is the latent, intelligent energy that's available to every one of us, that is the creativity intrinsic within us. In traditional Christianity, they would talk about having the experience of the Holy Spirit. I don't care what you call it. But it is activating that something within us that brings forth the expression of creativity, that hones your intelligence and your perception. The obsessive need for control, this compulsive manipulation to get what you want, it grows out of fear. And all fear arises as a result of our belief that we're going to lose something. And the reason we have a belief that we're going to lose something is that we don't really believe that we are one with all it is to begin with. You know, the fear that there's not enough to go around, the fear that you won't be fulfilled, the fear that you're going to be hurt, the fear that you'll be abandoned, and it goes on and on and on, and you get unhappy. The result of that is just plain to be unhappy. And the darndest thing about it is we get into a kind of a vicious cycle. You get unhappy, you try to manipulate and control and make things to be the way you know that they're supposed to be. Then you're disappointed because they never turn out that way. Then you get angry. And then when you get angry, you're not fulfilled. That's part of the anger that arises. You develop another expectation and you start trying to do something about that. and it doesn't work out because you've gone back into the manipulation and the control, and you become unhappy, and then you control and manipulate, and then you get disappointed, and you're unfulfilled, and then you get unhappy, and you see how it goes. It just keeps going on, and it's a vicious, vicious cycle. And a lot of us get stuck in that. So why not stand back instead and relax, take a look at your life, experience your experience, and begin to ask yourself some questions. And one of the first questions that I like to ask myself when I get stuck at a point like that is, why is it that I feel this has to change? Now, I'm not saying that change isn't valuable. I'm not saying that we should ignore the need for change in places. But we need to look at it. Why is it that I'm wanting to see something change? Is it possible, just possible, that I may be operating out of some kind of a belief? Operating out of a concept that there's someone or something or some circumstance that is doing something to me, that I'm really at the effect of it? And if I can look at that and say, yeah, maybe so, then maybe I'll have to admit that I've put myself in the position of being victimized. But what is victimizing me? But my own perceptions, my own concept about things. When we focus always on what's wrong, what's bad, what we don't want, what we're doing is we're establishing barriers that prevent our accessing this innate creativity, our talents. We put barriers around our ability to be able to activate that creative activity of our own life, the Holy Spirit, if you will, or activate the Kundalini, call it whatever you want, that basic something within us. We create barriers around this, and we stifle our ability to be able to move past those barriers because we get stuck in them. We own them. And after a while, we get to really love them because it's what we identify with. I have a friend of mine who's she's a minister, and she was in our church in Albuquerque, and she was on a trip. She was going through the School of Ministry in Denver, that branch up there, and this was quite a number of years ago, 15 years ago or so. And so she'd go up and back every once in a while, and she was on this trip, and she passed through Colorado Springs, and she stopped to see a friend of hers, a couple that she had known from years before. She'd known them for 25 years at that particular time. And the woman of this couple and this young minister were young mothers over in Arkansas together. That's where they became friends and all that. And this other woman was married, and let's call them Joe and Mary. Anyway, Mary had developed, as this young minister described it, into a very, very compassionate, loving, insightful human being. Just a pleasure, a joy to be around. And Joe was still the old curmudgeon he'd always been. Gritch, gripe, moan, complain, gossip. And finally, this young minister said to Joe, she says, you know, you see the world very different from the way I see the world. I see it using that old ploy, the old cliche. See, you see the world as a glass half empty and continuing to drain. And I see the world as a glass half full, continuing to fill. Why don't you just relax, sit back, watch life, and consider allowing things to be just as they are? Now, Joe was a very bright, probably much brighter as far as his ability to deal with abstractions than Mary was. But Joe was stuck. He was stuck right where he was 25 years before. Now, I haven't gotten any, well, I got a little follow-up a year or two later on this, and he still hadn't changed then. Now, that's been 15 or 20 years ago, so I don't know what's happened with Joe and Mary. I hope she dumped the creep and, went on. Anyway, that's not the kind of thing that the minister recommends, is it? No. At any rate. But you see what I mean? Be supported right where you are. Allow life to be as it is. And it doesn't mean that you do not do things that you know you can do to help bring about transformation or correct error. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like Joe was compulsively attached to maintaining the demeanor of that kind of griping, moaning, complaining grump. And the last I heard, although it's been a long time, he's still doing that. He just couldn't be there and be supported. How often do we do that? You women, for instance, have you ever, I'm going to pick on the women, have you ever seen somebody show up in your circle somewhere, another woman who's just gotten a new hairstyle, and you looked at it and you said, oh my gosh, will you look at that? It looks horrible. How could she have done such a thing? You see, there's nothing wrong with that. It may not be the politest thing in the world, but there's nothing wrong. You're speaking the facts as you perceive them. But the moment you look at it and say, what a stupid woman that is. Doesn't she have any sense of taste? There must be something going wrong in her mind. You see the difference between that? You can do something to me that may hurt me. Step on my toe. And that hurts. And I can be angry. And I can look at you and say, you've stepped on my toe and you've ruined my $100 pair of shoes, even though they're 25 years old. You've ruined them. But then if that's factual, it's not polite, but it's factual. But where I go astray is when I get into the moral judgment of it and said, you are a clumsy, dumb, stupid idiot. And we do that too, don't we? Now, we may not always say it that way, but we think it. And that's what I'm talking about with this guy, Joe. He owned his persona, and he wasn't wanting to let go of it. Be supported where you are. Life is a process. I'm not saying that you suppress your feelings. I'm not saying that you allow yourself to be abused. Oftentimes when we want to change something in another person, it's really just what the psychologists would call projection. That is, you look at somebody and there's something going on in you that's hard for you to face, and so you project it on the other person. So when you find these things going on, ask yourself, what is this telling me about myself? You remember that admonition in one of the Gospels, I can't remember which one, where it says, don't pluck the splinter out of another's eye when you've got a plank in your own. And this is so important. This is the idea of projection that we see. When we blame the world, we don't have to take responsibility for anything, because it's always somebody else's fault or something else's fault. But the fact of the matter is you can only change yourself. And if there's any blame, then you ought to point it toward you. But even that is not useful. Because when you do that, then the influence that you can have on other people by virtue of the atmosphere that you create, the aura that you present, begins to diminish. So if unhappiness grows out of not getting what you want, perhaps you ought to just learn how to take what you get. Ooh, but that's not enough. How do you know? Have you ever really given it a try? Instead of obsessing on what you don't have, how about working on what you can give and take what you get instead of trying to control and manipulate. How about just showing up for life and trusting in the process? See, the key to all of this that I'm talking about here this morning is that getting what you want in life is okay, but getting in touch with your own inner capacity to express all of the gifts and talents they've been giving you will take you past what you want into experiencing what you are, who you are. And knowing how to communicate this with your own inner self, that hidden splendor, that hidden potential, is what's going to be able to move you past this need to obsessively seek to have it the way you think it ought to be. Let's have a prayer, shall we? A little thought here that Robert Naranjo back there gave me in a bunch of stuff, writings that he picked up and collected, and I so appreciate. It has to do with change. And it goes like this. You can't change the past, but you can ruin the present by worrying about the future. And the message here, of course, is you can only live this moment in this place. This is the only moment there is. This is that one moment in time. So relax into your breathing. Become aware of the rise and fall of your breath as you join me in this process. Know that there is only one reality. You know, as it said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. That is the creative impulse behind all things. That's all there was. And that was God. God was the Word. God is it. And there was nothing made except that was made through the expression of that Word. Therefore, I am part of the makings. And everyone everywhere is part of the makings. We say that there is one life. That life is God. And that life is the life I am. There is one intelligence, one creativity, one harmony and balance, one essence, one field of possibilities and abundance. There is just one. And I am totally immersed within it, and it is totally immersed in me. As Ernest Holmes said so often, I am a center of God in God. And as I realize this, I know that healing is but the acknowledgement and acceptance of my identification with this field of oneness, of allness. I am one with all of the possibilities, all of the goodness, all of the light, all of the joy, all of the harmony. And out of this, embracing this, I am healed. Now, any of you that may have in this moment a particular upset or disturbance or desire or felt need, take a few moments and declare to yourself, I am already one with everything I need to satisfy this. In the realization of this truth, that there is just one, and each of us is one with the one, I accept fulfillment in all ways. I know the joy, the love, the peace, the compassion, the abundance, the energy, intelligence, and creativity of the universe is right here, right now, coursing in and through every aspect of my being. And for this, I am so grateful. I just rejoice that this is so. And together we declare, and so it is.